Our next speaker is Naomi Klein, writer of No Logo and
Disaster.
Shock Doctrine and Fences and Windows and many, many very important articles and other things. I've actually known Naomi for quite a long time, not very well, but we've gotten to know each other better recently because we've been talking a lot about geoengineering. And that's got something to do with her next book that I'm sure we're all looking forward to, and the next film that Avi Lewis is going to make over there. And hi, Avi. Hi, Mom. So Naomi comes to us from Toronto, and she's a wonderful writer, a wonderful thinker, a wonderful activist, and please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Pat. I'm really in debt to the fantastic work of the Etc. group. Those of you who are not familiar with their work and are learning about it here for the first time, I hope you will delve deeper into it. Go to their website, download their reports. They're doing incredible popular education, and I've learned a lot from them. You know, when you listen to Pat speak, it's always a little alarming. I think a lot of us here probably believe that we understand the ambitions and the depths of the colonization of public space, of the privatization of our world, and then we learn about all of these new frontiers out there. But this is not science fiction. This is really happening. And as part of my research for this project, I've been going to gatherings of the scientists and policymakers who are taking this very seriously indeed. And after the collapse in Copenhagen, we've really seen an acceleration of this, because even the governments that are like the U.S. government, that are very proud, supposedly, of what happened in Copenhagen and touting the joys of the Copenhagen Accord, what they do know is that it in no way averts climate chaos. And so they are actively pursuing this so-called Plan B behind closed doors. And you really see a causal relationship between the political failure to deal with climate change and this acceleration of the embrace of technologies like geoengineering and these ideas like pouring sulfur into the stratosphere in order to dim the sun. It's a kind of a new dark age that they are trying to impose on us. So this gathering is about Rio, and many of you may have heard this story, many of you may not. It may be an apocryphal story, but there was a big debate at the first Rio summit about whether or not then President George Bush Sr. would attend the Earth Summit, and it was touch and go there for a while, but at the very last minute he did go. But he said in an interview something that has been repeated over and over. He said, "We're here, we want to be involved in these negotiations, but I want to make one thing clear, and that's that the American way of life is not up for negotiation." And I think it's really important for us to understand that in the 20 years since, that has been the case. That has been the underlying logic. And not only has the American way of life not been up for negotiation, but those 20 years have seen a rapid acceleration of the globalization of the so-called American way of life. And what is that American way of life? It is based on the idea that there will always be more. That is at the very heart of what is sometimes called the American dream. The idea of endless, constant growth, that there will always be a new frontier. As soon as you reach one limit, you will be able to transcend it. And that's sort of, you know, who Sarah Palin is in the world, right? She's easy to laugh at, but she came onto the political stage at this moment, actually, when people were realizing that they had hit these ecological limits. You know, polar bears were on the cover of Newsweek magazine, and then along comes Sarah Palin, and she says, well, there's this wonderful magical place called Alaska, This is another frontier, and you can come up and drill, baby, drill. You remember that moment. And so this is just a telling and a retelling of the narrative that is really at the heart of Western culture, that is at the heart of the colonization of the Americas, of every colonial project, a new frontier. And sometimes the frontiers are physical frontiers, like Alaska, but more often now they are technological frontiers that tell us that we will be able to overcome the physical limits with these new technologies. But it's this expansionist logic, and the logic that is at the heart of the scientific revolution, articulated probably best by Francis Bacon, that it is that man, and they did mean man, were apart from nature, apart from women, and had the capacity to put nature into constraints, and this is the famous Francis Bacon quote, and make it new by the art and the hand of man. And interestingly enough, Francis Bacon's writings and ideas inspired the creation of the Royal Society in the 1600s in Britain, and now the Royal Society is the primary champion and the most powerful and most credible champion of the idea that we can fix the planet, fix the sky through technology, through geoengineering. And I say all of this because I think it's important that we understand that we are in the midst not just of a political and ecological crisis, but also of a narrative crisis. We find ourselves locked in a narrative loop. We are telling ourselves, we've told ourselves these same stories about our ability to dominate each other, our ability to dominate the planet, and also that no matter what happens, we will be saved. And this is at the heart of so many biblical myths, you know, get yourself into enough trouble and an ark will come along and take you and your friends away, or there will be a rapture and you will be brought to the New Jerusalem in the sky. So in other words, you don't have to deal with the effects of your actions. There's always an escape hatch. And so there's something strange about these sci-fi solutions that Pat talks about, and it's interesting that we use the word sci-fi because, of course, we have imagined this future so many times in Hollywood movies and science fiction books that it's almost as if it's happened already. It has an air of inevitability about it, and that is the power of story, the stories that we've been locked into. So I think as we look forward to Rio, I think we need to understand the depths of the challenge that we face. That when we challenge these technologies, we really are challenging the stories at the center of Western culture, what we call civilization. And in a sense, it precipitates a crisis to challenge these technologies, because even though they seem really far out there, you know, synthetic biology, you know, reflecting the sun back to space, fertilizing the oceans, the truth is that they fit perfectly within our current economic, social, and cultural paradigms. This is what we do. We dominate nature. We use our ingenuity to fix any problem. We overcome any limits. We always find a new frontier. So even if we have an initial feeling of, whoa, there's something wrong with that, the only thing that we have to do in order to bring on the reality that Pat has just laid out is nothing. Is just to sort of go limp and let it happen. Because all the momentum of our society is propelling us towards that future. It is what we do, only more so, right? Only more extreme. So that's the bad news, is that this is the story, and this is the logical conclusion of the story that we've been telling ourselves for so long. And we have been manufacturing landscapes on a massive scale. You know, I live in Canada. The tar sands are visible from space. It's the largest industrial project in the world. It is not oil drilling. It is the skinning of the earth. The tar sands cover an area as large as England. So we are already engaged in a process of dramatically changing the earth. And so all we're talking about when we talk about colonizing the sky and doing that deliberately it is just more of the same. But that said, there is a different quality to it. But before I move on there, I think one of the things that's striking about it is that the similarities in the logic of how we talk about climate change and how we're proposing to fix it through technology. This idea of fixing the sky, the idea of reflecting the sun's rays back, assumes that the Earth's climate systems are simple enough that we could treat the Earth as if it had a thermostat attached to it, and when it gets too hot, you can just turn down the temperature. And that, of course, assumes that climate change is just a temperature problem, that it isn't part of a broader ecological crisis and part of a broader pattern where we're hitting all kinds of ecological limits, not just the limits of the atmosphere to absorb the carbon that we're putting into it, but the limits of the ocean to absorb the stresses of overfishing, or of our soil to absorb the pressures of industrial farming, or of our aquifers to sustain the pressures that we're putting on them and the pollutants that we're putting into them. These are all interconnected, and in some ways climate is only the most visible, the most dramatic, and the scariest, but they're all interconnected. But so instead we just treat it as if it's a temperature problem, so we can just turn down the temperature. But that, in a way, is the arrogance with which our governments are treating the climate crisis right now. Because we act as if we have the ability to control, how much are we going to allow temperatures to increase? 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees. These are the arrogant discussions that take place in Copenhagen and Cancun, and that will take place in Durban in a few. I think about why people have that sort of instant fear, that instant cringe when they hear about these technologies. I think it has to do with the fact that there is something inside so many of us that longs for wild places, or places that we actually haven't already colonized with our technology, with our pollution, that we haven't already left our imprint on. And so the idea that we would do this to space, that we would do this to the stratosphere, that we would do this to the sky, is very frightening. And I was in Louisiana shortly after the oil rig exploded and sank, and the waters were just filled with oil last June. And I actually flew over the ground zero of the disaster site. And this was the point where, you've all seen the images where the ocean was just striped. It looked like it was bleeding. The Gulf looked like it was bleeding. There were these massive stripes of oil. They were red, sort of rusty red. But when you had that sort of aerial view and looking down on it, I was in a Coast Guard plane. It was oil till the horizon. And what was most disturbing about it was just this feeling of claustrophobia. Like, you don't realize until you're confronted with it the extent to which you count on there being places like the open ocean that seem in some way to be too vast to be changed by our behavior. But then suddenly you look at the open ocean and it looks like the bottom of a garage. It looks like the bottom of an auto repair shop with puddles everywhere. And you realize actually we have gone that far. And that's, I think, why geoengineering is so frightening, and why we need to articulate what it is about it that's frightening. And because it's a healthy fear. It's some kind of an instinct that's being awakened in us. And like I said, I think that it evokes a cultural memory of a time before the scientific revolution, even in European culture, when the earth was considered sacred. We often